Good evening, Danvers. This is Mark Zubrick reporting for Topics of the Town News, April 14th, 2021 episode. And I have a special guest with me today, Michael Hagan. And I'd just like to mention, John Toomey has been a long-term co-host with me, and I have been a co-host with him. He is currently unavailable due to being cautious, so we'll continue to function without him, but we look forward for him coming back soon. Today we will focus on the elections, some of parts of the town budget, and the future warrant articles that are being discussed. The agenda and opinions are solely by the Topics of the Town News host and commentators. So right now what we have is the elections coming up on May 4th on Tuesday, and they'll be held at the Danvers High School. Typically that is a good turnout, but it's something that we want to advertise. Now, at this time, Michael Hagan and Mark Zubrick are candidates for positions. So what I'd like to do is give an opportunity for Mike Hagan to give his not announcement, but a presentation of his positions for the position of the library trustee. So Michael, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mark. My name is Dana Michael Hagan, and I am asking for your vote as a candidate for re-election to the Peabody Institute Library Board of Trustees on Tuesday, May 4th. For almost 20 years, I have served as a library trustee and recently as chairman. Patrons of our library, I am sure we all will agree that the Peabody Institute Library is a particular source of civic pride for the community. This is due to the beautiful building it occupies, and most importantly, the excellent services it provides to our citizens. As chairman and a trustee, I felt a particular obligation to protect and nurture this indispensable civic accent. As chairman, I've had the pleasure of working with a cohesive board of trustees and a library director who have continued to work closely and cooperatively with a yearly budget request that is reasonable and will allow us to retain state certification, remain eligible for the maximum amount of state aid to public libraries, and provide the level and variety of quality services that our citizens have come to expect. We are pleased that we have historically been able to accomplish these ends while maintaining the library's portion of the town's operating budget around 1.25%. We believe that the library provides tremendous value for the money. As chairman, I've made sure that our director continues to work closely and cooperatively with our outstanding Public Works Department to keep the building, which is a signature property in this community, safe, beautiful, and useful. This is not an easy task in a 130-year-old building, but we are grateful to our citizens for their willingness to support us, as well as the support from the town manager's office. Thank you. I look forward to continuing my longstanding service to the community. With your support, please vote Dana Michael Hagan for library trustee Tuesday, May 4th.
Thank you, Michael. That was excellent. And you have been on the library trustees for how many years?
Almost 20 years.
20 years, and now you're chairman at this time. So that has worked out very well. And it's a trade-off with the community of your service to make the library better and more cohesive, like you said. So now, to take advantage of the program opportunity, I will deliver a small, quick speech in regards to my nomination or my candidacy for the Danvers School Committee. At this time, we have 2 seats that are open. But what I like to do is I like to say this. Mark Zubarek is your candidate for the Town of Danvers School Committee. The best way to give back to our community is to serve and participate in town government. I have dedicated myself to public service for the past 35 years, including elected and appointed positions to town meeting, finance committee, and the select board for 6 years, select board, 10 years on the finance committee, and now over 20 years on the town meeting. And I value this experience because it gives me an opportunity to participate with the town. I will be a valuable voice on the school committee. I am dedicated to listening and providing guidance for the betterment of our schools, which reflect our community values. I will serve as your school committee member without the need for on-the-job training. I am well prepared and have extensive experience in all the functions of local government and public education. The most serious issues the new school committee must consider as a priority, most urgently, is creating and implementing a plan for a safe return to in-person learning. As of April 5th, the lower grades returned to in-person classes. The other grades must return immediately to prevent any further decline in our level of education. The pandemic and rapidly changing state and local regulations for returning back to school have been frustrating for students, parents, residents, and teachers alike. And I will go into some examples of the discussions that I've had while campaigning. Students deserve a quality education and must not be hampered by the political restrictions which continue to be imposed on our educators, students, and entire community. Having better communication between the community, teachers, and administrators will help us work together to make the best decisions for our students. We are all proud of the commitment that the Danvers community made to support our schools. This includes competitive salaries, which attract quality teachers, administrators, state-of-the-art technology, and facilities. Our school facilities are the envy of the North Shore. Over the years, the facilities were built to best support our students with feedback from our community. The key elements for the school board to succeed must include these 4 key elements. The school committee must be independent, must lead and not just follow, making the education process more open and obvious, getting community feedback, input, and putting it into action. That's the key. Improvement of expectations, technology, and standards. I ask that you vote on May 4th for the 2 open seats on the school committee. It is time for a change. So what I like to do now is just, I don't know, Michael, have you got any comments in regard to your campaigning?
No, I just am working hard at it. Repetition, reminding people of voting, reminding them about my candidacy, and ask them to support me. I mean, we have lots to do still ahead at the library, and I want to continue to steer the ship.
Great. The one thing that I mentioned earlier is that I've had doorstep, front door, back door steps where I had conversations with residents, the voters. And one of the things that they're exceedingly frustrated with is that the school department has not initiated the in-class learning sooner than they have. It's great that they're going back to class, but we need to get our education process to a point where it is better than it was last year. This year has been, very disappointing because we are still under restrictions by the public health departments. The second item is always that our children are tested at various times. Children, I should not use the term children, it should be students. Students are always tested on an annual basis. And what I think we need to do is we need to determine how this past year has provided any expansion of the education process, and the only way we're going to find out is through tests. So I think there are plans coming up in May that MCAS tests will be taken, and I think those should be a measure of how far we have gone from last March or February till now, because basically we have done one school year. So those are my two examples. The people are very frustrated. They want to talk, and every time I go and campaign and I knock on the door and I get wrapped up for a half an hour, and people are very, very open about some of the comments. So that's what I need to bring back to the school committee when I get elected. So the next item that I have on my agenda here that I have prepared is that we as a country, state, and local communities changed the role of government forever, and that was done by COVID-19. Last year, Danvers was promised that if they masked up, practiced social distancing, and limited their travel for just a few weeks, we would be able to move on with our lives, reopen our businesses, and ensure that medical system was not overwhelmed. And we all complied. Sadly, and this is not a reflection on the town, but it's a reflection on the state, power-hungry politicians eager to establish government control over our lives refused to surrender their authority, even as it became clear that our hospitals were not being swamped. What's astonishing, however, is the fact that millions of Americans, or Danversites, either tolerated or encouraged the stripping away of their freedom for a false sense of security. And I'm speaking from a standpoint where I, as a young adult, young teenager, came from a country where social distancing was not implemented, but freedoms were surpassed beyond everyday life. We had people squealing on other people. They had reports that were made, and we lived with that. But I remember all of that, and this is the same things happening here. Now we're seeing the results of these disastrous policies. Hundreds of thousands of small businesses have been forced to close, trampled by mega corporations like Amazon, Home Depot, Lowe's, which have continued to operate. All the shopping centers are open, but now we're suffering on our personal freedoms. Houses of worship have been shuttered, with politicians unconstitutionally ordering millions of religious Americans into their homes, forbidding them from exercising the right to peacefully assemble to peacefully assemble and worship as they see fit. This was a very serious issue in Poland, where I grew up as a teenager. The Polish church finally, always said, stay out of my business. Poland is 95% Catholic. So the communist government in Poland had to really be very careful of how they behaved with us. The truth is that while mask mandates and lockdowns will eventually come to an end, Americans' perspective on government seem to have changed forever. Our children and grandchildren will be forced to foot the bill for this reckless public spending, a fact that too many are willing to ignore because it's politically inconvenient. For decades, millions of parents correctly observed that public schools have become indoctrination centers where our children are programmed to develop a understanding of the American culture. Now these same parents are the ones clamoring the loudest for school to be reopened. For years we fought to undo the ruinous effects on our healthcare system and the explosion of the federal deficit. Yet there is massive public support for COVID-19 relief spending, and would spend more taxpayer dollars in 1 year than Obamacare did in 10. Our message going forward should be simple. We will never send our children back to schools that teach students to hate our culture. We will never again allow governments to shut down our places of worship, close our businesses, or scrap our election laws. If there's one lesson America should learn from this pandemic, it's that government action has failed to combat this complex crisis. If anything, it's making it worse. Danvers elections must introduce a bold vision for Danvers, one which ensures that the government stays out of our pocketbooks, schools, businesses, and places of worship. So this is a conglomeration of different facts that I've been able to gather, and it is really true that our government has totally changed from what we experienced 2 years ago. So, David, if you can just throw up my famous point of levity. I miss the good old days. Remember when you could actually have an opinion without offending somebody. That is a cartoon that I found, and it's so appropriate lately because everybody's getting offended. Michael, you got any comments on that?
I think it's a lot of things. And you and I are almost the same age. You're older, thank you. And,
thanks.
But growing up, I grew up obviously in America, but society has changed in many ways in the 69 plus years that I've been here on this earth. Religion was a very big issue growing up in Danvers, even though it wasn't all over the newspapers, but within the household, Catholics and Protestants, it was a big deal when I was in high school to actually have a ecumenical service together. That was like, wow, that is really moving forward. A priest and a minister and kids who go to school every day, socialize and date or gather, were actually together in the same place of worship, even though they were from different faiths. And that was, growing up, I remember people when being a young boy when President Kennedy was running for office, and religion was an issue with him. People made statements that were absurd, but if he gets elected, are we going to have to eat fish on Friday? He's Catholic. Are we going to have to listen to the Rosary at 5:45? These are things I heard as a young lad. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And then it goes another way: civil rights. All this stuff moved along. The Vietnam War movement, polio. When we were kids, polio was an issue. They came out with a drink that we were drinking polio vaccine. All these things that you remember in life, and now the pandemic has arrived. I certainly have been vaccinated. I got both shots. It certainly, whether I'm not sure you and I agree totally about the way the government's handled it, but these people are elected to serve the citizens in the manner which they feel appropriately. But I'm glad to see the vaccines have finally arrived and the people are getting vaccinated. Although children do need to be with each other, they need to be socializing.
Right.
Need to be learning in the classroom. Parents suffered 2 incomes. Parents, people probably lost income because who's going to take care of the child? They both had to work. My own private investigative business, that suffered. Courts closed. People were still committing crimes, but the courts closed. Everybody's suffering in some way. But I don't have a grudge with the government and the way that somebody had to do something, and whether we'll see whether it was right or wrong. But
I think we'll see the results in probably the next few years. But right now, what we need to do is, everybody has complied with every directive, but all these rules and regulations are guidelines. Basically, they are a protection of our health and welfare, basically.
One thing you mentioned, Mark, that interests me, I guess, you've done your homework and you're going to be a great candidate for school committee, in my opinion. MCAS, they're going to be taking them in May.
That's what the plan is. That's what I understand.
I've looked at those. My grandson, who is he's in the 5th grade now, but I've looked at them when he was, 4th grade, 3rd grade. You know what? I have a master's degree. I'd still be in school. I'd still be in school. If I had to take that, I'd be the oldest one still in school in Davis High. It's just where these tests come from. And unfortunately, I guess that they don't learn about the Pilgrims and Plymouth Rock and this stuff. It's MCAS, because the kids need to study for that,
right. See, this leads me, and thank you for the a flow of information here. The school committee organization and responsibilities. What should I do? This has been a question that's been raised over and over again. What should I do if I am concerned about my school's test scores, which really leads us into the MCAS test scores? If you are concerned about our school's results or the amount of time students spend preparing for state tests, here are some questions you can ask your school principal and school site council, which is school committee in this case. What are the contents and standards for each subject and grade tested? I don't think that's been disseminated enough to the parents, because really the parents are nurturing these students to take these tests because they're required, but they also include their own historical information, similar to what you just mentioned, Mike. But they are they should be part of the testing program because they have to understand what their kids are getting taught in the school system.
I think somebody like you, and you've mentioned it before, and I agree, is that, and I'm only parroting because I certainly haven't researched it like you have. If you're paying the same amount, and I think you brought this up, and I think you ought to elaborate on it a little bit. If you're paying, if the system is paying the same amount per child as another community, communities around us, and they're getting better test scores, there must be an issue. And so I think you've probably hit that already, haven't you?
I have, but I believe that the difference between the school systems this is the return on investment basically, because the town of Danvers pays so much per student or invests so much per student. Other towns invest the same amount, but they teach differently. They teach different subjects that lead to the MCAS tests. MCAS tests are not the end all of testing. This is something that the teachers need to absorb and instill into the students that yes, there are subjects and questions that have been on the test, but here's what we're going to be learning. And this is where the curriculum comes into play. And that's where the education department has to figure out how best to merge both of these, the needs for the test, because they do need to pass it, but they also need to learn what's required for their future life. One of the questions that I have raised to me was, why is it that when our students graduate from high school and get accepted to college or university, they are basically in the first year, at least the first semester of college, they do a repetition of the high school requirements. Because I believe that our students deserve to know all of the basics, but when they reach college, they have to be repeated. And that's because they haven't learned all of the facets of it. Now, one question was placed to me and says, why am I paying $50,000 to $70,000 a year for the university that my child or my student goes to? And what it is just a repetition of high school. So I think what we need to do is we need to focus our attention of what the requirements are to get into college, but they also need to know the basics, and that's where it comes into play. You know, with the cost of education is very expensive, even in our own town.
I wonder about the accuracy of the reporting when it comes to communities same or similar. So like an example, or who do you make responsible? And you point to maybe the way that kids are being taught. An example that I can make, not with education, but with the retirement system. Right. I'm an elected member of the retirement board, been serving there a long time. Retirement system, we have investment managers that we hire. There's a top dog money manager for all that kind of checks with them and reports. But 1 year you can go from, our system could go from being in the top 20 in Massachusetts to the bottom 10. And that's happened. And we, as responsible fiscal uh, people for the board, asked the question, and the answer is choices that they made, the way they maybe uh, made purchases for stocks or something like that.
Right.
So it to me, it's kind of it might be the same idea. I don't know whether you can actually put a finger on that, you know.
It's the rate of return on investment, and that's the financial term. But to education, that's totally different, and I understand that. But I think what we need to start thinking of, how do we get the whole community involved in education? Because right now, education is in its own little club in high school and middle school and grammar schools. And the teachers and parents that are associated with those students are totally in a different environment. We need to bring in the entire community, and that's when you start learning of what results are really required. And the thing that I have found is that parents are very concerned about the directives and requirements set by the state education department. They're concerned that the state is running the education in the town of Danvers. I believe that the town of Danvers is an independent town and should comply with the directives, but not to the letter of every law. So I may be barking up the wrong tree, but I also have looked at how important are the test scores. Test scores give you an indication of how students are performing at a particular school, but they don't tell you the whole story. The test scores you see on this organization or the state website, as reported by the State Department of Education, compare groups of students from one year to the next, but they don't tell you about individual student progress. They don't tell you about the richness of the curriculum, whether there is art or music, or opportunities for individuals to group exploration into particular subjects. These are important factors to consider when evaluating the effectiveness of our schools. So I plan to ask a lot of these questions when I go to the school committee. The thing is that not everyone has an opportunity to attend those meetings or even ask the questions. They limit the amount of time that's allotted to outside of parents to comment and address the school committee. The school committee represents the entire town, the entire community. That's, from cradle to grave, basically. Because we as a town have a culture, and one of the most important parts of our community is the education of our students. Our students are the most valuable commodity that this town has. And every time you turn around, everybody seems to indicate that the values of our homes and the values of our community and businesses is dependent on the school and the education of our students. And that is true, but we need to involve the entire community instead of just segregating one section from another.
I think what you might be saying, if I'm getting it right, is that people, resident taxpayers, parents, elderly, everybody has a voice, and they need to be heard. A lot of people, and we've experienced that already. We've chatted on other shows about it, and people think they don't have a voice, and that becomes an issue. Somebody like you probably reach out to people and say, look, tell me, talk to
Right.
me. I'm your voice. That's important.
And the thing is that comment or that concern has to be delivered to the school department through the school committee. And that's where it becomes important because we all are the fabric of this community, including education, government, the electric division, the water supply, the sewer department, the DPW. Everybody has a contributing piece to our fabric of our community.
But getting back to the school, Mark, when you're talking about parents and their concerns about their children being educated, and I got to say, my kids, one in their 40s and one in their late 30s. The school town was very good to me when they were there. I cannot say anything bad about the way they had to work for it, had to hire advocates, things like that. But I got to say they were good to my kids after the battle. But I think that I'm not sure how many emails the school committee gets. We may, I mean, I don't know, but a lot of people are not controversial. They're not confrontational. They want to complain. Wherever you work, there's always a water cooler crew complaining about the boss. But when the boss is there, they're oh hey boss, oh hey like that. But I say to people when they complain about something else, I say, have you ever made a phone call to a select board member or some other member? No, but they like to talk about it.
Right.
So somebody like you, when you get on there and you're receptive, you might be able to bring a lot of enlightenment to people that, yes, we do have a voice. May not always win, but at least somebody is listening. When we've already seen that, Mark, we've gone and we've watched, and some boards don't listen. People think they have a voice, but they don't.
That's right.
They weren't being heard.
That is a motto of my campaign is, and I think social media has forced me into going into Facebook, and I am part of Facebook
Great
now.
idea, Mark.
So my feeling about it. I always was very hesitant, but I do appreciate it when people make comments on Facebook, and they do. I need to answer those. That's the key. And the thing is that we cannot live by social media alone. We need to have personal contact with individuals because that's when really things happen. But I'd like to bring one other point up because that has been a point of discussion with many residents. And this goes back 2-3 years. And as you know, there's always an issue that drives us to run for election, whether it's for school committee, whether it's for selectmen, whether it's for library trustee. There's always an issue that drives us and keeps us there. One of the things that was brought up 3 years ago is that the standards in our school system are not high enough because our expectations have been lowered, and that was even done through the agreement of the school committee because they look for 60% participation, and that's good enough. My point is that we have to raise the standards because that will bring every student up to a higher level of learning, and they'll be able to work and study in the future at different locations. But let me just read this thing. How high should the standards be? All states are asked to set high standards for students, but they have the flexibility to choose those standards on their own. And this applies to the school committee as well. 42 states and the District of Columbia have adopted a Common Core state standard for reading and math in an effort to set common goals. The remaining 8 states have standards in place as well. States are responsible for creating their own science and social studies standards, subjects not included in the Common Core. Although the Common Core and other state standards provide a framework for what students should learn, schools decide how those students will be taught. Standardized testing is meant to make sure that no matter how schools decide to cover concepts, students are learning essentially the same skills. Accordingly, state and local leaders continue to grapple with the question of how high the standard should be set. Educational teachers or leaders face the challenge of raising the bar and holding high expectations for students while keeping the standards realistic so that the majority of students can achieve them. By raising the standards, you challenge the high achievers, but you also bring up the middle achievers into the same category, but you also bring up the low achievers to a middle achievement level by challenging the students, and they learn from each other. So that's my explanation of the expectations, and I was very disappointed when those expectations were raised 2 or 3 years ago. And that's one of the issues that drove me into campaigning and volunteering for this school board position. Because I think we can influence the level of education in Danvers because we need to. Now, just as another example of questions that have been raised during my campaigning is, what is the student to teacher ratio? What is the student per counselor ratio? Percentage of teachers 3 or more years of experience. And I've found this information, this is basically for the high school. Students per teacher ratio in Danvers is reported here as 11 to 1. 11 students to 1 teacher if you take an average. The state average is 12 to 1. So we're right there. Student per counselor. We have 235 students to 1 counselor. And when you go through the high school process, you have the counselors, calling you in their office and trying to convince you to do the right thing. I'm sorry?
Join the Army.
Join the Army, right. Sometimes it's the best thing that can happen to you.
Yeah.
And the state average on the students per counselor is 269 to 1. So we're well below the number of that the state represents. Now, we have a very well qualified educators in our system. And what it says here is that 97% of our teachers at the high school have experience of 3 or more years. So they're not novices, and they're well educated and well prepared to teach the high school students. In this case, the state average is only 89% of the teachers are more than 3 years, have more than 3 years experience. So it's a combination of things that are happening to our education, and one of the things that we do need to do is challenge our teachers, our students, and our parents, because they deserve to be challenged to a higher level, and they can learn a lot better and a lot more in depth of the education that we provide. Now, one of the things that has been very much discussed too is that social sciences are not experienced by all the students. They have, different courses that they take. But one of the things that I found was very good was the co-op education. Basically, they go on a assignment with a business for 40 hours during a semester. And they learn an awful lot, because that's when they learn discipline, they learn time control, and they learn what each individual does that. Because I went through Northeastern University, 5-year program, and I went through 4 different companies that I worked for. Oh, did I learn some things, what not to do and what to do. So it takes a lot of time, and experience is very valuable. Michael?
There's no substitute for experience, that's for sure. I learned that as a very young police officer, and then 42 years later, I was the old police officer. When you talk about the ages of the teachers and their experience, 3 years, maybe that's for different reasons. Maybe the wave of the ages, people retire, but it might also be hiring less experienced for start out money to the system, cheaper, and then takes longer to make maximum pay. That might be a decision where they recruit younger ones at a cheaper rate. I mean, it's all set rate, but
It's not cheaper, it is appropriate rate, because that is all dictated by the positions that you're applying for.
Yeah.
However, what we in this town have done in many cases is we've hired experience level of, whether it's police, fire, teachers. They have more experience than an entry-level teacher would have, or fireman would have, or a policeman would have. Now, police go through a training program. And I'll just give you an example of, private industry. I hired and fired engineers that came out of various schools. When they came out of school green with no experience at all, it takes 2 years to get them to a level where they can function on their own with limited supervision. So it takes time to develop an individual. And what we need to do is, in our school system as well, and it looks like we have, is develop the teachers and somehow entice them to stay, because that's in perpetuity, they provide the education to the different generations that come across. So, the other item that I want to talk about, and I'm going to skip item 2 and 3, but I will continue on my exploration of what the concerns are from our students, parents, and some teachers as well, because I've spoken to teachers. And one thing that has been very clear to me, especially during the last Finance Committee meeting that we conducted, and you were there, Michael, and I have, and one of the things that came up is, why is Essex Tech involved in education? because we have right now 201 students or students from Danvers that have applied and been accepted, and they're going through the program, which is a combination of college-bound and technical programs. And we did a documentary on Essex Tech about 2 years ago, which was two-part, and basically it covered the superintendent's explanation of what really goes on in the school system, and then we had a tour through the different shops and different functions that they perform. But the question that keeps coming up is, why are we paying $3.4 million for 200 students? Why can't they come and be educated in Danvers, in the Danvers school system? So the other night we had a long discussion, and one of the things that I brought up is, why are we not attracting these particular students? Maybe there's a certain percentage of the students that do belong to the technical side, which we do not provide, or the carpentry, plumbing, electrical, and all that. But we can attract the college track students that go to Essex Tech, because they get a very good education there, and their reputation is tremendous, and very many more people want to attend that school because it's like a college campus, and it is a well-run organization. It is expensive. The thing is that we forget that the expense for Essex Tech includes all costs that are associated with running a school, repairing the school, doing the roofs, doing the grass cutting, doing everything. We only discuss the school committee controlled budget, which is for salaries, wages, and expenses that pertain to the inside of the schools. So the question was raised, why can't we, as the Danvers School Department, why aren't we able to attract the students that are migrating towards Essex Tech? And I think that's an important decision that we as a school committee need to explore with the superintendent and the curriculum developers and the teachers in themselves, because we have to make Danvers that much better than Essex Tech. That's when we get those students back. Otherwise, they are free to go to that school. Michael?
What about St. John's Prep, Bishop Fenwick? What about the ones you lose to them, too?
Well, that's.
I mean, they pay a healthy price to go there, but they apply at the prep, they take a test or whatever, and they get in a Fenwick or whatever.
Yeah, but St.
I don't know
John.
how many they absorb. I don't know how many they absorb from Danvers at the prep.
But the thing is that St. John's Prep, St. Mary's are all private pay for those
Right.
schools. Now, the complaint in our public school system has been, and that's what was discussed the other night, is why are we paying for their education, because they really belong in the Danvers High School system or Danvers School Department.
Exactly.
And I said, attract them. Give them something that's better than what Essex Tech is doing. And that's what we need to do. And this is going back to my subject of how do we improve the quality and how high should the standards be. That's where it's all coming to. We have the basics of the school department. We have developed a good reputation. However, our reputation is very well received by new residents, because I think we're relying on the past experience and the past education levels that we have imposed on our students, but we need to improve them. And that's what will bring the population, but we need to do it all together. We cannot just do it, the school department is not just going to do it by themselves, because what they need to do is have the school committee reflect the wishes of the community. Michael? We have about 3 minutes.
Okay. No, your points are well taken. And I know that you, as a hunting dog, if and when you get elected, you'll be on that, and you'll be asking the right questions. And like the other night, when you asked the question that you knew the answers to, and were looking for information, and you have people thinking, I'm sure you'll continue to do that.
Thank you. David, if you can put up the next quote. I have a little, not a cartoon, but a picture of Mark Twain. And this is so appropriate to the discussion that we've just had and what's going on in our community and into our country, basically. It is easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. Now, you got to start thinking about that. That is something that's happening to all of us, and we need to educate ourselves on what this is really meaning for our future and our culture and our town itself. Now, Mark Twain, I love the guy. He's got the cigar in his hand, and he's really looking good. And I really, that is a quote that I think is very appropriate at this time. So, one of the things that I need to do is wrap up. We have 3 minutes. And what I like to do is, on the 27th of April, we will have our last show before the elections and the town meeting. Well, town meeting is be later, but the town elections. So what I like to do is I'm going to send out an email to all of our candidates. And DCAT has already done a 5-minute speech from each candidate. Supposedly they all came. But I like to do this on the show live. And the positions that we have here is town moderator, which is Patricia Fraser. She's unopposed. Board of Selectmen, Matthew Duggan, Rick Betancourt, Gardner Trask, and Tim Donahue. And the school committee, Robin Doherty, Alice Campbell, Johan Hunter, and Mark Zubrek. So what I like to do is give the show an opportunity. We tried this with the selectmen. It was half successful, but I like to invite all of these candidates, and if they want to do it remote, that's fine. That's probably the best way to do it. But I like to give you an opportunity to come on the show on April 27th, and it'll be at 3 p.m., and it'll be for 1 hour, and we'll give you 3 to 4 minutes each, and you can have anything to say. So, David, if you can throw in the last, there you go. This is, again, Ernest Hemingway's quote, "Courage is grace under pressure." And I watched the documentary about Ernest Hemingway and what he went through. He was a great writer, but he made some very decisive and expensive